Hello, welcome to the Desert Blockchain monthly session on Wednesday, December the 21st, 2022. And my name is Jay Carpenter, founder of Desert Blockchain. I notice there's a mistake on the lead slide, which I'll correct. It should be December 21, 2022, not 2021. So let me stop my screen share. And if you're not familiar with Desert Blockchain, we have these monthly sessions on generally the fourth Wednesday of the month, but this happens to be the third Wednesday of the month because of the holiday. And basically this, along with our second Saturday of the month, where we have a session at the facility behind me, which is Desert Blockchain Camp at 27th Avenue and Georgia in Phoenix, Arizona. In any case, welcome to the monthly session. Tonight's going to be a review of 2022 and a little bit of a forecast of 2023. And if you're not familiar with how this works, we have a program called Desert Blockchain Citizens, where we're supported by folks that become citizens for $10 per month through Patreon. We appreciate your support. We're primarily community supported. We don't take many, few, but not many sponsorships. And basically, we're building this through decentralized community support. So if you happen to become a Desert Blockchain citizen, or you're interested in becoming a Desert Blockchain citizen, you can join us live on the Zoom, get a Zoom link. You get a presentation a day in advance for what we're going to talk about. And that's some of the benefits, and we continue to work on additional benefits. So let me go ahead and get started. Gary, thank you for joining. Hope you can hear me. And
yep, can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do is step through the slide presentation and kind of review the sessions that we had in 2022. And then I would love to, Gary, chat with you about some of the developments that have been happening and how that impacts the legal realm. Professor Marchant is in charge of the Sandra Day O'Connor Center for Law, Science, and Innovation, also is the organizer of the Governance of Emerging Technology and Science Conference, and we'll talk a little bit about that this evening, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. So let me go ahead and run through the slides, and then we will open it up for conversation. All right, so hopefully you can see that. And this is the table of contents. We'll talk about all the sessions that we did in each month of the year and how that relates to some of the broader events that happened in 2022. And then I'll briefly talk about what I could see is my prediction for the most prominent thing or things that might develop in 2023. So, and by the way, this particular presentation will be available to the general public starting tomorrow, the 22nd of December, sometime after 6 a.m. Arizona time. So the first session that we had was on 3 events that I consider to be premier events in the decentralized space, and that's GETS, which Professor Marchant again organizes, which is the Governance of Emerging Technologies and Science, and that was in May, and that we'll talk a little bit about that in the coming up, but that's about 200 of what I consider to be the leading policy, legal scholars, and and technology policy scholars that come together from around the world and give presentations and talks and collaborate on what could be next in the emerging realm of policy, which I consider to be one of the critical areas for innovation in the decentralized space. The next event was DWeb Camp 2022, and that happened in Mendocino, the Redwoods, about 3 hours north of San Francisco, and that was at the end of August. And that again involved a lot of what I consider to be some of the top legal scholars in the world gathering together, along with many of the top technical innovators in the world gathering together for 5 days in the Redwoods and to give talks and so forth. I gave 8 talks, I think it was, and it was just an incredible event. And then immediately following DWeb Camp 2022 was the Science of Blockchain Conference at Stanford University. And this again was what I consider to be many of the leading innovators in the decentralized web space, and with a heavy emphasis on academic cryptography. So that was in January, and that just kind of teed up the rest of the year. And in February, we talked a little bit about the incredible explosion in non-fungible tokens and the resistance that was happening among the developer community there. But we saw this incredible speculative boom in non-fungible tokens, which has died down. And now we're starting to explore some of the more useful use cases for non-fungible tokens, which I think can be applied in the legal realm in some very interesting use cases. Then in March, we were actually supposed to have a presentation from the co-organizer of Desert Blockchain, which was Jason Horton, of the technical architect of Nori.com, which is carbon sequestration. It's beyond startup now, but Jason was not able to make it. So we did a talk on something called Peace Camps, which is applying non-fungible tokens to artistic works of expression that might be beneficial to folks in areas of conflict like the Ukraine and Russia. And we also talked a little bit about the possibility of standing up a new form of structure that's similar to Desert Blockchain Camp, but more aligned towards people in conflicts and refugees and so forth. So then to get back to Gets, I did a little run through basically of an approach to an alternative to centralized regulatory constructs, which I labeled Federated Consumer Safeguards. And I actually did present that at the Gets Conference, Governance of Emerging Technology and Science, on May 20th, 2022. And there is a recording of that presentation available in our YouTube channel. So then we shifted into talk about peace, conflict, and Web3, and how Web3 might be applied to further the advancement of peace, might be applied to mitigating conflict, and how decentralization could be an important component, emerging component to both foster peace as well as mitigate conflict. And in the center there, you'll see power, force, and possibility. And that was actually an artistic representation by an artist who is from Russia that we were working to package into a non-fungible token. However, we actually ran into some issues around copyright and some legal considerations that sort of put that initiative on pause. So our next session was getting ready for DWeb Camp 2022. And this was an exploration of centralized and decentralized alternatives, particularly in the realm of dispute resolution. And I used DWeb Camp as a model where there's basically, even though it's decentralized web, there is a centralized governance and dispute moderator in the form of Wendy Hanamura of the Internet Archive. So I use Wendy as an example, love Wendy. She is definitely a fan of decentralization, but I did use her as an example of centralized policy as well as dispute resolution. And then on the decentralized, I used the fellow in the image there, who is Ronald Coase, who was with the University of Chicago and postulated the Coase theorem in, I believe it was 1959, at the direction of the Federal Communications Commission, to do basically what's a market-driven, decentralized dispute resolution process around radio spectrum at the time. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in economics in 1991, I believe it was. But I think Professor Coase's model of dispute resolution might have some very interesting applications in decentralized dispute resolution. So then the next month in July, we talked about, again, DWeb Camp Directory, which is a prototype that I stood up in anticipation of DWeb Camp. And I talked about how there might be a way to solve one of the big missing pieces in computer science called solving or squaring Zuko's triangle. And Zuko's triangle basically says you can have 2 out of 3 desirable elements in a decentralized construct. You can either have human meaningful naming and addressing, or you can end decentralization, or you can have human meaningful and it be secure, but you can't have all 3 of these. And there's been a lot written about this, and it's been a quest for many to square Zuko's triangle. And I proposed that there might be a squaring of Zuko's triangle using telephone number-like addresses, where you've got both a machine-friendly address in the form of numbers, and then you could overlay that a letter mapping on those numbers to make a human-friendly representation of that same address. And I assert that that might be a way to square Zuko's triangle. So moving on, and this was basically the presentation of that. Whoops, I'm going backwards. Sorry. So then in August was, we did a live stream actually on the grounds of DWeb Camp. You can see some of the magnificent redwood trees behind me, but we did a short live stream, and you could get a sense of what was going on at DWeb Camp. It was amazing, and definitely this was my 4th DWeb event. I've attended all of them, and this continued to be an extraordinary experience that I'll always remember. So then in, let's see, and that was just the image of the DWeb Camp live stream. And then in September, we did a overview or a review of both what happened at DWeb Camp, as well as the Science of Blockchain conference at Stanford. And you can take a look at that. And then in October, I did a session talking about the military advantage of applying blockchain constructs in areas of conflict. And I used the nations that are on the western edge of Russia as examples, and gave some data and information and articles regarding how Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, not so much Belarus, but definitely Ukraine, have been adopting blockchain and decentralized constructs over the last 12, 14 years in anticipation of the conflict that's currently happening in the Ukraine. And I assert that, and it's too early to definitively get all the information on this, but I assert that the Ukraine in particular has been able to withstand the cyber attacks and other attacks by the Russian forces, partially because they have applied blockchain technology to their communications infrastructure, their financial infrastructure, and probably in all likelihood other key areas to keep their economy, their systems, their IT structures up and running. So you can take a look at that. Then in November, the Stellar Development Foundation announced a $100 million fund to launch and get adoption for their smart contract construct called Soroban, where they are now in the test phase, the community test phase of their smart contracts as applied to the Stellar network. And we're going to be talking more about that coming up in 2023 and 2024. The 100 million is to be applied in those 2 years, the next 2 years basically. And we're anticipating that there might be well, there's been a hackathon announced for January 13th, 2023. And I'm in the process of inviting the banking industry to collaborate with the academic institutions in both Phoenix and Los Angeles, and create a team in each area to participate in the Soroban hackathon. So we'll be talking more about that. Then obviously we're doing tonight's session for December, which is a review, but let's talk a little bit about the forecast. And Gary, I'm delighted that you're on tonight, because I think the regulatory question marks are as bright or brighter than ever at this point. But I think 2023 will be the year of where centralized approaches to regulation and policy are going to meet head on with decentralized constructs. So this is a little bit about me and how you can contact me. And then the other thing, this is in sort of the additional information section, but we are fortunate in the Desert Blockchain realm that we have had 2 winners in the Stellar Community Fund number 8 and Stellar Community Fund number 11. In Stellar Community Fund number 8, we had Crypto Cannoneer, which is housed in Desert Blockchain Camp, and this happened in 2021. Took 2nd place and 5th place, and basically was awarded $20,000 in worth of XLM or lumens to develop that project. And if you take a look at the competition was really strong. And for Shane Sandler and Crypto Cannoneer to come in 2nd and 5th is a very, very strong showing. This was a global competition. And here's a little video on Crypto Cannoneer in Desert Blockchain Camp. And just to show you, there's no favorites. Shane also submitted in Stellar Community Fund number 10 and did not place. So there's not, it's not a biased competition. It's definitely on arm's length. And then just recently, on December 5th, we formed another team that was included Shane, and we created SNAC, which stands for Stellar NFT, NFC, Access Control, and our team placed fourth out of 152 submissions and over 34 countries participating, and we were awarded $7,500 worth of Stellar Lumens to further the development of SNAC. So this is some videos on our team, and that the image of Shane there with the beard was our introductory video, and then the image of Shah holding up the Stellar cookie was our presentation, and we had a lot of fun with this. So, and then here is our video on some of the ins and outs of how to participate in the $100 million Soraban Adoption Fund. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to stop the screen share and open it up for questions. Gary, any comments? Anything you'd like to say about GETS coming up in 2023?
Sure. Thanks, Jay. Yeah, our GETS conference this year will be on May 18th and 19th. Abstracts are due by the end of January. And I think we're going to work with you, Jay, to have a plenary panel on sort of decentralized models going forward, sort of DAOs and other ways of decentralization, going beyond, of course, cryptocurrency, but the whole, Web 3.0 and things like that. So if anyone is interested in working with us on that, contact Jay or me, and we can hopefully put together a great plenary panel at the conference on that issue. But if you also have just a paper to present or a talk to present, we are opening it up for abstracts by January 31st, and then looking forward to a great conference on May 18th and 19th.
Great. Now I've got some suggestions for that panel as well,
Great.
Gary.
Yeah.
So cool. I'm looking forward to that. And then DWeb Camp 2023 has been announced for June, and I can't remember the exact dates, but it will again be at the same location in Mendocino, California. And I think it's like June 21st through maybe the 26th or so. Don't quote me on that. But the registration has not been open yet. In terms of the Science of Blockchain Conference, it's my understanding that will happen on the East Coast for the first time. And I'm guessing, if I had to guess and bet, I would guess it would be at Cornell University, because Cornell has been very active with the Science of Blockchain Conference, which was labeled the Stanford Blockchain Conference prior to last year. And you definitely have to get in early on that. They had over 4,000 requests for passes, and they only issued 1,000. And so you definitely have to get in early, and it helps to know somebody who's organizing that conference. So anyway, Gary, any topics you'd like to talk about in the regulatory realm? Or
Well, it's going to be an interesting year. I mean, with the FTX bankruptcy, caused a lot of consternation in Washington. Still probably haven't seen the end of that yet. So it's a good time to be a bankruptcy lawyer. Be a lot of bankruptcy litigation. But the question is, whether this will spur any kind of legislation. Now that we're going to have a split Congress, that generally means a lot of gridlock and not a lot of movement. This might be an issue in which there could be enough consensus to move something forward, but it's hard to see it right now. the bill that would basically give authority to regulate crypto to the CFTC and take it away from the SEC was their main proponent was the head guy of FTX, Sam, what's his name? So that sort of diminishes that bill a little bit, I think, and there's not really anything that seems likely to move forward immediately in Congress, and so then we're left with this hodgepodge of alphabet soup of agencies trying to figure out what to do. The Ripple against SEC case should probably be decided in 2023. That'll be critical because if Ripple wins, it will really put a dent in the SEC's authority. If it does, if SEC wins, that will really embolden them to be even more aggressive. So that's going to be a key, change in direction one way or the other, depending on how that case is resolved. And it should be, in this coming year. So I think,
Gary, do you know what level that's at? Is it district, appellate, or
it's at the
Supreme?
District Court, I believe. Yeah, the trial, and so it's there's been multiple motions to dismiss and so on that judges rejected from the SEC. A lot of discovery issues about what documents Ripple can get from the SEC. They were withholding a lot, and they sort of a lot of the procedural motions have gone against the SEC, which sort of is giving, I think, Ripple some hope that the judge is sympathetic to what they're arguing. So we'll see how that all turns out, but it's going to be an interesting decision unless it settles, which these things usually do, but this thing's been going on for over a year and a half now, so I don't know if it will settle. And then, I do think, blockchain will continue to be moving forward in all these other areas, things like supply chain, carbon credits is going to be a huge area. A tremendous amount of interest in that now in blockchain through Nori and other entities using a blockchain approach to verify these credits. The healthcare area, I think, is moving again pretty quickly with ways to use medical records through blockchains, and so the whole supply chain, all those different areas. I think there's going to be continued growth in activity and maturation. So I think that's where a lot of the action will be myself in 2023. I think crypto is going to go sort of on the back burner a little bit and sort of sit there, I think, without a lot of huge movements, but you never can predict.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know Professor Marchant and his activities, Gary flies all over the world, is invited to numerous conferences. I think you had like 3 stacked up at the same time. You overbooked last year, and so we're very fortunate to have you in the Desert Blockchain community and to be talking about these items, Gary. So, here's the question I would ask you. Do you have any idea how it will be reconciled, this fundamental paradox between centralized regulatory elements and these decentralized constructs that, if you start to put centralized regulations on a decentralized construct, it's like trying to box in a cloud, basically. It looks like there's something there, and when you look up at the sky and hey, there's a cloud, we can put a box in it, or we can put throw a rope around it or whatever, but it just disappears. But so that's one fundamental mismatch between centralized regulation and decentralized constructs. But number 2 is the how do you determine jurisdiction on a decentralized construct, because it literally is global, kind of floating over the entire earth, and one jurisdiction has very little, only can possibly hope to regulate and apply regulations to some small segment that's very, very difficult to identify. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, they're both interesting questions. I mean, I think there's this fundamental tension between centralized and decentralized approaches, and there's, I think major forces and momentum behind each of them. And as you say, they don't mix very well. But we saw from the reports of the various federal agencies on the central bank digital currency that came out this fall that it seems quite likely now that the U.S. will move forward with some kind of centralized digital currency. Will that undermine a lot of these decentralized currencies approaches and Bitcoin and so on? My sense is they'll compete. They'll both try to succeed, but they are in a sort of a fundamental tension. And one, this whole issue of centralization versus decentralization, and we're seeing this in all kinds of things of all the other applications of the blockchain as well. How decentralized should they be? A lot of people are saying with the FTX bankruptcy, this shows the decentralized approaches don't work, but it really was the centralized, cryptocurrency exchange that was the problem here. It wasn't the coins themselves and the blockchains themselves. It was the centralized exchange that was the vulnerability. And now some others Binance might be in trouble. And so we're seeing, in fact, this idea of even trying to have this centralized way to make cryptocurrency more convenient for consumers is backfiring and actually is creating these vulnerabilities and bad credibility for the whole industry. And we're going to see more and more of sort of more decentralized approaches to buying crypto without going to a centralized exchange and, all kinds of other DeFi, decentralized finance mechanisms. So we're going to see this constant tension, I think, between the centralized versus non-centralized. It's going to continue on. And then what was your second part again? You asked yourself.
Well, the jurisdictional issue.
Oh, yeah, the jurisdictional issue. So that's a huge problem. To some extent, we've already been dealing with it with the internet. The internet, to some extent, presents the same issues of people in different parts of the world interacting with people in other parts. Who has legal jurisdiction over that? At least with the internet, you know who the parties are usually and where they're located. With some of the decentralized technologies, you don't even know who they are. And you don't know where they're located. So it's an extra order of complication. But, it's something that courts and legislatures have already been trying to grapple with. Of course, now we're going to have metaverse as the next big thing. People say will present a lot of the same issues of avatars who we don't know where they are, doing things that might break laws in some places, but not others. How do you legislate or regulate or enforce against that kind of international aspect? So, our whole legal system is built on jurisdiction, on the idea that parties act within a certain territory and the law of that territory applies. And now with the internet, now with blockchain, now with DeFi, now with,
Metaverse.
We're going to be we're challenging that central paradigm, and it's tension for sure. The problem is there's no good solution, right? There's no good way to create a world government or anything, and we don't probably want a world government. So it's just going to be a matter of struggling through, but there's some very tough issues and cases that'll have to be fought through. It's a great time to be a lawyer. That's all I have to say to my students.
Well, I don't know that I can agree, but
nobody except lawyers likes lawyers.
In any case, I do think there's another dimension to this conflict, and this, which I call the sort of the schizophrenia of the policymakers, because they want to be, encouraging innovation in the decentralized space, and hey, we want to be the leaders in the world of blockchain and blah blah blah. And then at the same time, they have this regulatory quandary in terms of how do you regulate it.
Right.
So that's yet another collision point in my view. But I would like to say that, you brought up central bank digital currencies, and the Stellar Network and the Stellar Development Foundation are leaders in central bank digital currencies, and they're actually working with the Ukrainian government to implement a central bank digital currency in the Ukraine. And Stellar.org that has published quite a bit on central bank digital currencies. And when I was at the what was then the Stanford blockchain conference in 2020, I met 3 people from the United States Federal Reserve that were there to talk with people about creating a central bank digital currency for the United States. So it's a big topic. It brings up all sorts of issues on control, privacy, and so forth. My view is that it will be irresistible for governments to implement central bank digital currencies. There's some incredible functionality that can be added to regulating and managing the money supply and all that sort of thing. And again, I guess that this might be yet another collision point of central bank digital currencies versus sort of organic blockchains and organic decentralized constructs. So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents on those items. In terms of, if we could talk a little bit about DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. I think that would be a really interesting topic for the GETS conference this year. But my sense is that they have kind of run into some very difficult issues in terms of governance, voting, identifying who's participating, balancing incentives. How do you get people's attention focused on the issues that need to be addressed with a decentralized autonomous organization? So I think there's as much excitement that I've sensed around DAOs. I think that they are running into some really, really difficult issues as well. What are your thoughts, Gary?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Again, there's some litigation already going on now about them that go to their governance and sort of accountability issues. It's an interesting concept. It's got a lot of excitement about it, but it does run into some real problems in terms of accountability. And to the extent, some people are using these for inappropriate and illegal activities, there's going to be a response, and the response may end up, restricting this pretty heavily. And so, I wouldn't be surprised if some pretty heavy feet come down on DAOs, at least in the United States, in the next year. And the question is, well, they could still operate internationally then, because of this jurisdictional issue. And so what would that mean? Will they be like FTX in Bahamas or wherever, and then how much can Americans, can they participate, and should they, given their lack of accountability? So I think it's something to really watch. I think it's something that's an idea with a lot of people interested in it, and a lot of maybe efficiency to try to reduce some of the overhead costs in a lot of different types of organizations. But on the other hand, they really are still trying to get their feet underneath them and figuring out how to be accountable.
And not only how to be accountable, but how to operate.
Yeah.
Because even without the regulatory issues, I don't think they operate very well because of the voting, right, because of the lopsidedness, because of the lack of a leader that has some sort of vision, direction, and so forth.
Right.
Most of the successful blockchain initiatives that are out there, in my view, have some sort of benevolent dictator like Vitalik Buterin or Juan Benet or so forth, where there is this centralized figure that has a vision for the direction of the whole thing. And if you take that away, all of a sudden you can have just this mishmash of cross currents and conflicting ideas and so forth, even without the regulatory issues. And by the way, in my view, most of the the DAO, the Decentralized Autonomous Organizations. I suspect the appeal, a big part of the appeal is to try to go around the regulatory questions that a centralized entity would be facing. So, which I think is problematic for sure. So, yeah. So,
Question. Yeah.
So, I think privacy is a big question mark. I was just presented with a petition to sign for the United States Congress regarding some sort of privacy issue that, bleeds into the whole crypto space and so forth. That's a very challenging realm to tackle. Who has your data, who owns your data, who controls it, how do we operate? My view in general, and I'll just throw this out there on the table, is that it's probably highly unlikely that centralized constructs are going to be able to effectively protect Jay Carpenter's privacy. I just don't see how that's going to work. I think the only privacy protection Jay Carpenter has is with Jay Carpenter to, operate in various ways, either in a completely determined identity mode or a near complete anonymity mode. And I think there are justifiable use cases and scenarios for each side of the spectrum. So that's just kind of my view of it. But any other issues that you're seeing, Gary, that are coming up? Professor Marchand teaches the blockchain class at Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. So anything else that your students are particularly keen on investigating and so forth?
No, not really. I mean, things like use in elections, healthcare, carbon trading, supply chains. These are all sort of major activities right now that students seem most interested in. Not so much, the other one is in sports NFTs and other NFTs. All I think will have a lot of activity in the next year. And so it's sort of a real, sort of fading away from crypto being the center of everything here and really looking at a lot of these other areas where blockchain is going to make a significant difference.
Mm-hmm. I think there's some huge copyright and licensing issues around NFTs. Mm-hmm. And I attended some sessions at DWeb Camp 2022 with some of the top legal scholars in the world. Larry Lessig, Primavera Di Felipe, and some others talking about the licensing issues around Nathan Schneider, talking about some of the licensing issues. I think that's a big area for exploration. I think another topic that was prominent at the GETS conference in 2022 was sandboxes. Mm-hmm. And Arizona certainly attempted a sandbox initiative, was one of the first states or entities in the world to stand up a sandbox. But the sandbox, as it was originally envisioned to be sort of this, I'll call it a safe space, for lack of a better term, where innovation could happen with some regulatory oversight and basically bounded levels of exposure. I don't think that has really played out, not only in Arizona, but maybe in the rest of the world. From what I gathered at the GETS conference, listening to the legal scholars from around the world on sandboxes, is that it's kind of like a more of a regulatory sandbox where the regulators are giving direction to startups and so forth, innovation, and the regulators at the same time are trying to come up with ways that work to apply regulation to some of the decentralized initiatives. So that was kind of my takeaway from the talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think state sandboxes are pretty limited in any impact they can have because you're still subject to all the federal laws. And it's really the federal laws and certainly the uncertainty about federal law that's really a lot of the obstacles to a lot of business uses of these new technologies. And so as long as you've got that federal hammer there or uncertainty about that federal hammer and the state blockchain does nothing for you, it's going to be pretty limited impact. Britain, Arizona, modeled their sandbox on the British sandbox, and that one was quite effective because it was the national government, and so it would basically be able to give you, a free pass for the entire regulatory system, not just the state part of it, and that did work quite well. The EU has just proposed to adopt a sandbox for AI, an EU-wide sandbox, and again, those sandboxes that apply to the entire jurisdiction and therefore all the laws that apply to an entity are going to, I think, have a much bigger impact than ones that only give you an exemption from a part of them and still make you subject to the rest of it, especially when the rest of it is the most important and heavy-handed part of it. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of state sandboxes is really doing a lot in terms of practical impact. It sort of sends a message that the state's interested in trying to help entities go forward, but it doesn't really do that much, I don't think.
Is there any kind of global forum or close to global forum, let's say like the United Nations or something like that, that might be able to offer some sort of sandbox initiative that would have a, pretty broad spectrum of countries?
Not really. I mean, we really don't have much global governance at all in this area. So, there's a financial activities task force that, puts out some documents and some guidelines that countries adopt. It's possible they could endorse something like that, but I just don't see them going in that direction. They're more sort of, cracking down on things and trying to deal with fraud and money laundering and terrorist funding and stuff is their major concern. So they're not in the business of sort of giving more flexibility to entities. They're trying to crack down on things. And so I don't see them going in that direction, but they're sort of the only international body that's really looking at this. I mean, I guess the OECD could do something.
What is that?
The Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is, the 30-something major industrialized countries. But again, it's not binding, but they put out different types of guidance documents. And for example, they're very active on AI. I'm involved with them on some work they're doing on neural technologies right now. So they can put out guidelines and principles, and these are done through the governments of these 30-something countries. So they do have quite a bit of clout, but they're not mandatory. But that's an organization that might, have some interest in this. But again, haven't seen any indication of that yet. They haven't really done much on blockchain or cryptocurrency at all.
Interesting. Well, it's certainly an area that is hungry for a solution or something that works. So, excuse me. One area that is missing that I think is coming up in the Twitter acquisition by Elon Musk is viable decentralized identity. And I think Mr. Musk is realizing that there is a missing piece for viable decentralized identity, and that kind of showed up in his latest poll where he was voted out as CEO. And excuse me just a second. So I am hopeful that there might be some progress in viable decentralized identity in 2023. So anyway, anything else come to mind, Gary?
No, not really. I mean, it's going to be an interesting year in Washington with all the different fighting factions, and I don't expect much positive progress out of there. So,
well, I'd like to make 2 points about, again, to echo your comments on FTX. That was a centralized entity, and it's cast a shadow over the entire decentralized realm. But please keep in mind that FTX was centralized. It was kind of out of control. And I think my sense is that people have gotten into crypto and centralized exchanges and so forth with kind of a bringing the things they're used to in the centralized banking realm and centralized financial systems. They've kind of brought that forward, and they don't realize that they don't have any kind of the same protections and so forth in the decentralized constructs. And FTX could have been trading Beanie Babies or tulips or whatever, and it could have had basically the same collapse. So I think that's really important to keep in mind as we move forward. So let's see. So anyway, that's just a couple of comments. There's one other area, but it's escaping me at the moment. So anyway, I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this policy realm, which I think is a fundamental piece for innovation, in order to move the decentralized constructs that everybody said have so much promise. One of the biggest missing pieces is this policy area. And so my second point is that, up until, let's say, Bitcoin, when we've talked about a technological innovation, databases, the internet, all those sort of things, they haven't had the policy and the financial primitives that decentralized constructs like blockchain have. So this is a whole new realm that people categorize decentralization as technology. It's software. They just say it's just software. What the subtlety that is overlooked in this decentralized global phenomenon, where basically anybody with a smartphone anywhere in the world, 6-7 billion people can participate in this thing. People don't realize how much value or finance is involved in the zeros and ones, and how much policy is a critical piece in this so-called software realm of decentralized blockchain and constructs. So anyway, that's kind of my 2 cents, and I am delighted that we have Arizona State University and your department, Gary, to be bringing the best minds in the world together to look at these issues, because they're really critical. So, all right, well, thank you for participating, and I think this was an awesome conversation, and I look forward to working with you on the panel for GETS this year. And if anybody happens to watch this, some of the folks in the DWeb community, please let me know if you'd be interested in participating in that. So,
all right, have a great holidays.
okay, you too, Gary. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
Bye.